Hi, this is Casey Grimes, and I am here to talk about the female reproductive system. I am personally fascinated by the female reproductive system for some personal reasons that I will talk about later in this project. The female reproductive system is vital to life. It's actually how we create life. It is divided into the internal and external genitalia. The external genitalia consist of structures that lie outside of the true pelvic area. So this includes the mons pubis, the clitoris, labia majora and minora, and also the periutheral area. And the internal genitalia consists of structures that lie within the true pelvis, and this is the vagina, the uterus, the cervix, the uterine tubes, also known as the fallopian tubes, and also the ovaries. The organ that I'm going to focus on within the female reproductive system is going to be the uterus. And I have personal reasons as to why I really like the uterus too within the female reproductive system. So the uterus is an upside down pear-shaped part of the female reproductive system. It is located in the midline of the body if you're looking at the body in the anatomical position. And it's also medial compared to the fallopian tubes and to the ovaries of the female reproductive system. It's a hollow organ, and it actually has a lot of functions to it. So if we were looking at the female body in the anatomical position, and we were to look at the median sagittal plane that goes down the midline of the body, we would come across the uterus. But the uterus is more distal compared to the heart and compared to the digestive system. It also lies posterior to the bladder, but it is also superficial to the rectum. People can have an anteverted uterus, which means it tips forward, or a retroverted uterus, which means it bends slightly backwards. So sometimes the positioning of the uterus, depending on the anatomy of a person, can vary, but it's still normal and it's still healthy. So the uterus again is a hollow organ, and it's made out of three different types of tissues. The outside layer of the uterus is the permetrium. The middle and the most thick layer of the uterus is called the myometrium, and the innermost layer is called the endometrium. So the endometrium consists of columnar epithelial cells. These epithelial cells within the endometrium, they have secretory glands in them, and these secretory glands have a really vital role within the menences of the body, and also they have a role in implantation of an egg to the actual endometrium of the uterus wall, and that's where pregnancy does take place. So the myometrium is actually the thickest of the three different layers of the uterus, and it does have a really vital role to do with childbirth because it is composed of smooth muscle tissue and smooth muscle cells. The different cells are the longitudinal muscle cells, the middle crisscrossing fibers, and the inner circular fibers. And again, these are really important in childbirth because they are the ones that do the contractions of the uterus, which helps push the baby out. And then there's the perimetrium, which is the outside layer of the uterus, and it is composed of a serous membrane that continues with the perinetrium of the body. And this does cover the outer of the uterus, and this is also what lines the outer portions of the organs. And this is just kind of a cool microscopic image of skin cells from the uterus. As you can see, the endometrium has the secretory glands, the myometrium, which is obviously the biggest part, and then the perimetrium, that is the smallest part that's on the outside that's lining the actual uterus itself. So as I said before, there are a few different functions of the uterus, and these functions are implantation, gestation, childbirth and labor, and also menses. So one of the functions of the uterus is that it has a responsibility for development of an embryo and fetus during pregnancy. It's an incredibly dispendable organ. It goes from being about the size of your fist to being big enough to hold a full-term baby. So it's incredibly elastic. And what happens is that during ovulation, a hormone gets sent down to the actual ovary, and then the ovary releases the egg into the fallopian tube. If there's sperm in the fallopian tube, it will go ahead and fertilize that egg, and then the egg travels down the fallopian tube until it reaches the uterus. During times of ovulation, the endometrium of the uterus thickens, and when this thickens, it's able to catch the actual egg so that the egg can go ahead and implant into the endometrium. Once the zygote is implanted into the endometrium, it causes changes in the body, and these changes in the body causes there to be an actual placenta. And then from there, the fetus just keeps growing and developing into a full-term baby. If the actual egg is not fertilized by a sperm during this process, what will happen is that the egg will go ahead and pass through the uterus, and this triggers the blood vessels in the endometrium to atrophy, and the actual lining sheds out. This is known as the menstruation cycle, and this happens about every 28 days in a female. So another function of the uterus is how it functions during childbirth and delivery. So what happens is that oxytocin, a hormone, is released from the endocrine system, and this oxytocin causes a positive feedback cycle to happen. And during this positive feedback cycle, the muscles within the uterine wall start contracting, and this contraction causes the baby to go out towards the cervix. And during this time, the cervix is actually opening up and dilating to be about 10 centimeters. And once it reaches that, and once the baby hits the cervix, it is actually pushed out through the vagina. The positive feedback cycle is actually one of the ways that this helps the uterus maintain homeostasis in the body. It's because it's providing a way to push the baby out, and it's causing, I guess, more stimulus to get the baby out so that the body can go back to a place of homeostasis. The uterus doesn't so much have a particular role in maintaining homeostasis in the body, but the reproductive system does. One thing we did talk about was the positive feedback during childbirth and delivery. Another way that the reproductive system helps maintain homeostasis in the body is that it does help keep the vaginal pH at a certain range. The vaginal pH needs to be between 3.8 to 4.5, and that's pretty acidic. And the reason for this is because any kind of microbes that come into that environment need to be killed off. That way, they don't lead to any kind of infection. And if you don't know about an infection down there, that can lead to other kinds of diseases. So, things that can happen is that if your vaginal pH is above a 4.5, you're more likely to get infections. You can get things like bacterial vaginosis, and that's one of the ways something can go wrong due to the reproductive system not maintaining homeostasis in the body. The reproductive system also produces hormones that cause sexual development and puberty, and these hormones lead to homeostasis in the body. For the female, these hormones are coming from the ovaries, and they lead to the body becoming able to bear children. However, I think that the endocrine system has a really big role in maintaining homeostasis throughout the reproductive system, just because the endocrine system is responsible for releasing hormones to the actual reproductive system itself. And these hormones, they do a lot for the reproductive system. One of the biggest things I can see going wrong with this, which is actually going to tie into my disease for this particular organ, is when there's too much progesterone that gets released into the body. So the endocrine system and the actual reproductive system are not working together to maintain right levels of progesterone. And when these levels are not maintained and the progesterone is too high, it can cause diseases in the body. The reason why I was so interested in doing the uterus for my final project is because I was actually diagnosed with endometriosis in January of this year. I had undergone a laparoscopic surgery in order to get done. It's affected my health a lot over the past 5 years, and on average, it's taken me about 5 to 6 years to be diagnosed. But I definitely do not let that get in the way of my everyday activities. So what happens during endometriosis is that during menences, when the actual shedding of the lining happens, the lining doesn't shed all the way, and they don't actually know the reason for this yet. There's still a lot of research being done, but the lining doesn't shed out all the way, and this lining ends up growing to other places as lesions in the body. I mean, it's been found around the ovaries, fallopian tubes, it's been found under the liver. Actually, mine was found under the liver. They've even found it in parts of the lungs and parts of the brain. And during ovulation and menences, these little lesions, they start to swell and become bigger, and it causes a lot of pain for the patient, and it's really intense cramping, and it's really hard to treat. One of the ways that you can treat endometriosis is by doing an exorcism, which is where they go in with a little laser and they actually burn these little lesions off. It's not a curable disease by any means yet. It still has a long way to go, but it's a way to keep it maintained is by doing the exorcism. And these are different pictures of what endometriosis looks like in the body. These little black specks of lesions are endometriosis. And this is another one too. Again, this is actually by the diaphragm and by the liver, so it did spread to other places away from the uterus. It doesn't always look like little specks though. It can also look like adhesions like this, where actual like skin is growing together where it's not supposed to be growing together. And again, with exorcism, they just go ahead and they burn that off. Symptoms of endometriosis kind of vary from person to person. Some people have really intense cramping, other people get a really bad bloat right before their period, and sometimes people aren't even in pain and they have endometriosis. So it just kind of depends on the person and what stage of endometriosis you're in. There are 3 different stages. It's stage 1, 2, and 3, 3 being the worst you can have. There isn't really a cure or a preventative measure for endometriosis yet, but a lot of research that's coming out is saying that people who have endometriosis can greatly reduce their symptoms when they follow diets like the paleo diet or when they cut certain foods out of their diet, and especially red meat, because red meat is known to increase the progesterone in the body, and the progesterone is what's causing the endometriosis and the flare-ups to be worse. So thank you for watching my presentation about the female reproductive system and especially the uterus. I think it's a really cool system. I think it's really neat what we can do with our bodies and that we are able to produce little humans inside of us, and it's kind of cool too to see how when things go wrong, how it affects disease wise. So thank you for watching my presentation. I really appreciate it.